Well, it's going to be with you week 5, one more week to go, and always goes by pretty fast. Next, we'll touch into a little bit of next week's subject tonight in the wilderness. A little bit look at the objects that were built during the wilderness, the tabernacle and the altar and some of the other objects. They're quite interesting, no question about it, in their symbolism and how they were used throughout the time in Israel's history. Anyway, before we begin, again, any urgent prayer requests tonight? Everybody doing well? All right, well, then let's go to a word of prayer. Father, again, in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to be here. We thank you for being such a gracious and loving God as we look down through history. And as we've been experiencing a little bit of what the world was like and how you handled your people and how you handled individuals, it's comforting to know that you're the sovereign God that controls all things. So no matter where we are, no matter what we do, we know that you're in control, and that gives us comfort in a world today that's full of chaos. And so in the meantime, Father, help us to be faithful. But at the same time, we pray, our Father, which art in heaven, thy kingdom come. Again, maybe even today before we leave this room. So watch care of us. We'll give you the praise for things that are accomplished. In Christ's name, amen. We talked about the Sinai. It's mentioned over 130 times in the Bible. So it's a motif that, or the concept of coming out of the wilderness certainly is an image that most of you can identify with, although I don't know if it's anything like the wilderness that we'll experience that we have seen in the slides. By the way, if we could turn the lights off a little bit back there, that'd help too. Right, man. Anyway, so the wilderness is a barren place, no growth, vegetation, a place, of course, to sometimes just to regroup. It's interesting to note, of course, Elijah was down in the wilderness 40 days, Jesus, wilderness. And then interesting, Paul, right? When he got saved, he went to the backside of the desert, it says, the Arabian desert. Not in the Sinai, but the Arabian desert. Spent 3 years there. Isn't that interesting too, the number 3? There's so much things, like disciples spent 3 years with, anyway, and I always tell my seminarians, by the way, that's 3 years. It seems to be a biblical number. Anyway, we're dealing with the Sinai, of course, this arrowhead-shaped region that's mountainous and very treacherous, and of course, if you get stranded down there with no water, you're out of luck. But the route of the Exodus that we saw went over a little bit last week. Recorded in Exodus and also again in Numbers. We believe all those sites that they stopped at had water. Some of the places, of course, one of the places there was not enough water, and Moses therefore struck the rock, which he was not supposed to do, but nonetheless was able to find water in the desert. So I would recommend that if you're going to go to this place, get a nice Bedouin guide, someone who knows where to find water. Now, this is still an exciting time to investigate, so I always challenge, if any of you win the lotto, call me, and we can spend the rest of our lives combing every inch of the desert, Sinai, looking for the people of Israel. That'd be exciting, huh? Whoa. Yeah. So I'll be taking up a collection later on this evening. Anyway, it's a fascinating world, no question about it. So we're dealing with specifically southern Sinai. The word Sinai itself, if you remember, according to the Egyptian text and even in the biblical text, it seems to suggest a southern extremity of the desert. And of course, we look very carefully that the Sinai is divided off into 3 areas. Upper area to the north is basically sands, and then we move into what is called the Thin, or T-H-I-N, thin area, which is not thin per se, but it's a geological formation of mountains and canyons and passes. And then as we move further south, it's all mountainous, with the traditional Mount Sinai being close to over 8,000 feet up in the air. So quite amazing. Anyway, this is the itinerary, and this is, again, I told you about the program Logos. If you're interested, they have also a digitized set of maps that you can purchase that look like this, explaining and trying to at least illustrate somewhat the different geographical movements within the Bible. And so, as you remember, this is a brief outline, at least 13, maybe, there's more than that, movements recorded that we've looked at so far, or we haven't looked at all of them, but recorded major movements within the book of Exodus that takes you all the way to Kadesh Barnea. And that's, of course, you can see up here. And this map would take us up to right about point 10 and 11 up in that area. Although we do believe we know where Kadesh Barnea is, but I don't think we'll get to it. Might try to remember to show a slide next week, because it was excavated by the Israelis way back in the 70s and 80s. But then, of course, in the 80s, the Israeli government gave back the Sinai to Egypt. So anyway, we looked at the Israelites that left Egypt after tremendous testing on the Pharaoh. And of course, even all the hardships he faced, he thought it was not over and went after them. They traveled, we believe, to the region of the Bitter Lakes. We talked about the word Yam Suf, which the King James took over from the Latin Vulgate, which the Latin Vulgate took over from the Septuagint. Remember, the Septuagint was the Greek translation in the 3rd century from the city of Alexandria. So it's always Septuagint, of course, is the number what? 70. All right, so it's always sometimes LXX, 70. And they translated it red, but apparently the scholars there do not know quite their Egyptian terminology, but it means reed seed. And so there are, we looked, and I tried to show you a little bit via Google Earth and some of the other slides last week, that there are a set of lakes, specifically the Bitter Lakes, which is pictured right there by the number 2 up in this region that the Red Sea empties out into, and then, of course, the Gulf of Suez. So I believe they traveled to the region of the Bitter Lakes. It seems like the only logical spot, not the Red Sea, as I mentioned last week. Anyway, Pharaoh changes his mind, pursues them. God tells Moses to or pursues the Israelites, and of course they get stuck there in and around the Bitter Lakes. And of course, you know the story, Moses holds up his rod, and the waters are driven back, and they cross on dry land. And like I said, it can't be the Red Sea, because the Red Sea is very steep. I mean, they'd have to climb down in and then scaffold to get up on the other side. It just doesn't make sense. So logically, logistically, of course, that as well as the name itself cannot be the Red Sea, but the Reed Sea. And of course, as I mentioned last week, how much water do you need? You've seen the flooding out there in Nevada. I mean, just 3 or 4 feet of water, which would bring up to your waist, just moves cars, does it not? Crushes cars and kills people. So Pharaoh gets caught in the waters. The Egyptians drown in Exodus chapter 14. Then we talked a little bit about moving 3 days to Marah, point number 6. So 5 is the area of where we believe the Egyptians drowned, in the area of the Bitter Lakes. Not quite exact scale here, obviously. Number 6 is where they go down to Marah. And then 7, they move their way down through, and of course God supplies them quail. And it's interesting, there is a host of birds that come through there very regularly and migrate on their way north. And quail is one of them. So God, of course, caused specific, the timing was right for the quail to come so that they could eat. Even today, they will string nets between trees, and when the quail fly, they are able to catch them in their net and use them for food. So quite amazing. In fact, I have a picture of that. If I can remember to show you, I'll try to put that in next week as well. And then God provides water from the rock, and then we have a story of the Amalekites attack Moses. And then we have verse 9, point 9, somewhere in this region, really point 8 and 9, we have Mount Sinai, more at point 8 than at point 9. And then they move up into Kadesh Barnea area, and they send the spies out. And of course, they come back, and they bring a bad report, and they want a new leader to take them back to Egypt. Exodus, Numbers chapter 13. Then, of course, as punishment, they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Not quite 40, but 39. Again, showing God's grace, by the way, if you look at the text. Anyway, we do have other scenes in Egyptian reliefs of the Pharaoh chasing after his enemies, as this pictured here. Again, nothing like that of the Exodus, obviously, because he lost. Anyway, this is Seti the First, and as he's tracing some Bedouin. But this is interesting because you have this phrase, remember we talked about it as well, if you do, where they moved after they came out of the, they were going to go north, and God said, no, don't go north. And of course doesn't specifically state why, and they had to turn around and come back. And of course one of the reasons why is the string of Egyptian forts, and it's also known as the way of the land of the Philistines, mentioned twice in the Bible. So anyway, this is Pharaoh Seti chasing after them. What is interesting, and what we have also in the book of Exodus, is a list of as we outlining the movement of the nation of Israel. Same thing with this guy, Seti the First. Again, I told you some of the genres as far as making inscriptions, and as well as even the Pharaoh had a day book outlining the day's event. Of course, he didn't write it, but his scribes did. But this seems to be along the same lines. And in fact, it matches up very well with the time frame of what we believe the Exodus to take place late in the second millennium, which fits well. And I told you, if you're really into it, you can get and read for yourself the Egyptian literature and see how it matches up with the biblical text. Many scholars have already done that before, so you don't necessarily need to do that. I told you about the fellow named Kenneth Kitchen. But what is fascinating about that is the style, you see. It changes over a period of time. The style that we have in the Pentateuch matches up perfectly with the late second millennium, not later in the first millennium, and certainly not during the intertestament period, where a lot of scholars believe the Old Testament was written. The genre just does not match up. So here we have a map showing his movement, but they are locations of water sources, and we believe that's the same that's outlined in the Exodus itinerary. Is the cities, we don't know where most of them are, but we believe they are sources for water that certainly would have been known to the people during the time of Moses. We just don't, we have some references of some of the cities mentioned in the itinerary in Exodus as well as in Numbers 33, but they don't give you a sign saying, all right, so it's 45 miles south, due south, southeast of this site, and you'll find it there. They just assumed, yeah. So this is a travel log, all right, as well as fortified cities along the way. But anyway, nice relief here showing you the Pharaoh, which I also made mention. The Pharaoh, as you can see in this relief, is always 3 times as big as everybody else because he was deified. So this is the itinerary, and maybe I should pull it out and blow it up, but this is what some of the things that we looked at again last week. Again, virtually the location of all of these sites mentioned in the biblical text is unknown. But there's only certain places you can go in the Sinai to access water and to make sure your travel is safe, and it's the fastest route. There were 3 routes. Remember, there was the way of Shur going up along the coast, which Israel did not do. Then you could cut across the northern extremity, and then the southern extremity that we see here, which it seems to suggest in the Bible. Names, of course, are now lost in the midst of time. But anyway, this is crossing the Bitter Lakes up here. Here's the Suez. And so as they move south, a number of major valleys. And we showed you a picture, and I'll show you again of the valleys. But deep valleys. But the most logical place for them to come is further south and come up what we now know as Wadi Faran. And I'll show you a picture of that. There's also located on this map some of these the possible locations for Mount Sinai. But anyway, this valley is big enough to bring a group of what we probably thought about somewhere about 30, maybe 35,000 people, and they could host them. And then somewhere we believe in the Rafah Plain is where we believe they settled, on Mount Moses, Jebel Musa, is where Moses went up and received the 10 Commandments. So again, most probably, these are local names for water sources recorded for you in the biblical text. But again, God thought it was significant, did he not? If they were not significant, they wouldn't be there. God was telling you very clearly that I helped the nation of Israel through the wilderness. So I don't know, I would imagine there are some remnants. Of course, desert is a treacherous thing, is it not? It does preserve things pretty well. But the sands, like the cities of Egypt, are just covered somewhere up to, sometimes 5, 8, 9, 10 feet deep after thousands of years. You wouldn't even know you're walking on a city because the sand is, treacherous. And so you have the same scenario down there in the Sinai. So the possibility of trying to find the Israelites is 0 to none, basically. But who knows? Like I said, win the lotto, give me a call. We got the rest of our life planned out wandering through the Sinai desert, huh? Sounds exciting. We know where a lot of the mines are. They mined, but again, you find some bones, but how you gonna? It's difficult to tell who is who, because the Asiatics were basically forced into slavery to mine these areas, and of course the Israelites were Asiatics. Some could be, but we just don't know. You have to imagine that with that many people living in the land of Egypt, they were used throughout the country for all different types of situations. We know that the Egyptians mined the Sinai for its turquoise and some other precious metals. They forced slaves to go. They went in the wintertime, not the summer, wintertime, and they have huge mining operations in certain places. Anyway, as we'll see, there's at least maybe 7 to 10 different locations for Mount Sinai. Yes. So this is a nice map, and again, I just lifted this off Google Earth. Not Google Earth, but doing a search, Google, and then go images. You can find most all the maps that I have that are, all the different books have been published, and they put them on. Somehow they eventually end up on the internet. But here's the Bitter Lakes again, and here again is the route, and this is Nahal Rephaim, Faran, where they're able to, which is very broad and has enough supply of water for them to move down into this region. Again, so you can see the blue line traveling its way out. And again, you can see the way of the land of the Philistines. Sure, actually these should be, they're basically the same. Here's the northern route, and here's the southern route, and some other possibilities of sneaking through different canyons to enter and exit out of the Sinai. Anyway, this also shows you a lot of the different locations for Mount Sinai, so I'll come back to it. Jebel Serbal, Jebel Sin Bishur, Mount Sinai, Jebel Musa, Jebel Laz. This is the fellow I was telling you about, Robert Carnook and Ron Wyatt, thinking that they crossed here and to come over. Anyway, I don't agree with them at all. But anyway, and Jebel Hela. So all of these different sites. Take your pick. And a lot of them fit well the biblical description, obviously, or they wouldn't be places to locate. Anyway, this is Wadi Faran, 81 miles long, all right? So we're talking about entering off the coast here, and it takes you about 81 miles to get into down by into the region down here by Mount Sinai, all right? 81 miles. And so look at the valley. This is again is Skyped off Google Earth, or actually you can see it very clearly on Google Earth. Just type, in fact, you can type in Faran and you can find it. It'll take you right there to it. But you can see the terrain, all right? It's not very easy and conditions. And again, you can see water certainly was an issue. But as you walk, guess what you come across? There it is, a beautiful oasis, all right? And we talked about this last week, as well as the Israelites, as far as the number of people that were there. It can't be in the millions because it says in the oasis there were 80 palms and everybody found shade. So if you had a million people, you're going to need more than 80 palms to find shade. Anyway, this oasis is 6 miles long, a lot of wells. It's the largest in Sinai. Like I said, it does snow there in the winter just because of elevation of the mountains, and the snow melts and it collects down into caverns, obviously, as you know, and collects in certain areas. By the way, just to let you know, I didn't know this till last year. All in this region here in the Negev, there are huge underground natural water caverns. Millions and millions of gallons of water is there. I just read that somewhere, and I confirmed it with some of my Israeli friends, but it's this natural, millions and millions of gallons that they can tap into if they need to. Right now, of course, most of the water in Israel is through desalination plants. 75% of all Israeli water is from the sea. And of course, maybe California should look into that because they have a population, of over 8.5 million. And
Does the bitter sea, is that something to do with salt?
no, it's just a word that, well, yeah, it has salt in it. Yep, it's more along the salt lines. Correct. So there's the beautiful oasis, and I got to go there, visit it a long time ago, and it's beautiful. Anyway, there is again the trek as you move further inland. Again, you can see the conditions of what it's like, and very mountainous. I don't know. So if we were going to look for the Israelites, we'd have to turn up a lot of sand. But I got a good 30 more years. So again, if you win the lotto, give me a call. Anyway, it's got its own beauty. It's kind of like Nevada or out there, Arizona. You been out in Arizona? Nice place to visit. I don't think I want to live there, but I get bored of the scenery after a while. But anyway, well, we're moving into mountain theology class. Mountain theology. Isn't it interesting that God said, "Get up, Moses, to this mountain, and there I'm going to deliver for you 10 Commandments." Mountains are mentioned 137 times in the Bible. Did you know that? Well, I just told you. 137 times. Mountain of God, 5 times in the Bible. Mount Sinai, 37 times. That's combined with another mountain called Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are the same. Mount Horeb is mentioned about 11 times, 11 or 12 times. Mount Sinai about 21 times, if I remember. Then how about Mount Zion? What does that refer to? Jerusalem. And if you remember in 1 Kings, when Solomon dedicated the temple there, he prayed and he said, "This is the place where you're going to put your name," what? "Forever." Wow. Mountain theology. Did you know that in Ezekiel 28, verses 13 through 16, that the Garden of Eden also had a mountain associated with it? Ezekiel talks about, of course, it's talking about the king of Tyre there, but he mentions Eden, and he goes on to say, and next, and then I, of course, I don't have the exact quote, but then I put you in the, and you put yourself up on the mountain there in the garden. Even the Garden of Eden had a mountain. Wow, kind of interesting. What do you know about mountains in the ancient world? Then you have some other mountains like Baal Saphron, Baal Lebanon, even Mount Carmel was a sacred mountain. Sacred mountain. And all the way down through all the different religious systems or cultures. Greek as well, of course, Mount Olympus. In Babylon, it was Mount Saffron. Mountain theology. This is a very interesting motif. 2 of them I show you here. This is Sargon's son here, Naram-Sin. That's Sargon. Remember Sargon? One of the best names in the Bible. I wanted to name all my kids Sargon. My wife wouldn't let me. I said, "Man, they get out in the play yard, someone's going to mess with them. They say, 'What's your name?' He says, 'Sargon.' And no kid is going to mess with your child. His name is Sargon. But never happened. I even try to convince my daughters. But anyway, this is one of the earliest stelas, which is a commemorative stone, like a tombstone, stands about 6.5 feet tall, of Naram-Sin conquering his enemies. As you can see here, he's about ready to kill one. But he's climbing the sacred mountain. And up above are three discs representing the sun god, moon god, and probably the sun, moon, and water. Can't remember the other one right off hand. But they're climbing up he's climbing up on the sacred mountain. Wow. Now remember, in the ancient world, the mountains, even in the biblical text, talks about how they viewed the cosmology, the beginning of the creation, they kind of believe that the mountains set on the rims of the earth and they held up the heavens. Held up the heavens. So if you get to the mountain peaks, who could you reach and touch? The gods. So you have a beautiful story, all illustrating that very well in Genesis chapter, the Tower of Mountain theology. All right? And so this one is this is a little bit later on. This is, by the way, also he has in the middle of this picture. I don't know if you can see it right there. You see the tree? Sacred tree. Certainly reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. I mean, this motif of mountains and sacred trees with serpents is everywhere. Everywhere. The sacred tree idea. Anyway, this is Hammurabi. This is Shamash, the sun god of Babylon. What is interesting, you probably can't see here, is the feet of Shamash, the sun god, is sitting on little mountains. He dominates the mountains, controls. That is found in the literature. Some of the same ideas talked about God reigning and ruling from Mount Zion is common throughout the ancient world. All right? But of course, our God is the real one. Makes a big difference. But anyway, mountain theology is very significant. In fact, class, here is the ziggurat, which represents stairways to heaven. Stairways to heaven. But we even have this even earlier in the concepts, well, I don't know, they're dated about the same time, the pyramids, which leads us to one of the most significant symbols that we can see here, and that's called the sacred triangle. Definitely a sign of fertility. It's the symbol of the woman, obviously. All right, the sacred triangle. It's seen throughout all the way down. Fertility, of course, was very significant in the ancient world because through fertility, all different rites that you performed, even sacred prostitution, to make sure that the gods would bless the land so that you could eat. Without rain, without food. Wow, the sacred triangle. And we even carry the sacred triangle in our wallets today. What's on the dollar bill, class?
Pyramid.
Ever seeing I?
Huh? Yeah, and the eye of the jackal, Anubis, by the way. Interesting, huh? Some of the same ideas that I've carried down. Even the idea I told you of sacred trees. Asherah poles, mentioned 30-something, over close to 40 times in the Bible. Remember, Gideon cuts down his mother's or his family's Asherah poles. Living trees, you know. Not too far away, class. December 25th. You're going to get that sacred tree out. Your grandkids or your kids are going to dance around it in the morning hoping the tree god brings all those nice little presents.
Really?
Do you think the Christmas tree was invented by St. Nick? I don't think so, class. Been around for a long time. Nothing new. Kind of fascinating. Anyway, look what I have here. Mountains and the hills are a master image in the Bible. Are a master image. Why? Because through which you can actually trace the whole history of redemption. Did you know that? The Garden of Eden, you have the mountain. Sinai, you have the mountain. Then God says, I'm going to take Mount Zion, where I'm going to rule and reign from, and then go all the way to the book of Revelation. Where does he rule and reign from? Mount Zion. From Genesis to the end of Revelation. Mountain theology. Whoa. Wow. Look at all the different elements within the biblical text. Exodus 19, God's mountain is a holy place, set apart. In Psalm 43:3 and Isaiah 24:3, God dwells and reigns on mountains. On the mountain. In Exodus 19:23, it's a threatening place that becomes a welcoming place for the righteous. Isaiah chapter 2:2-4. It becomes a welcoming place for the righteous on his holy mountain. God speaks of planting his people on the holy mountain, Exodus 15. Look at all the poetics about mountains. Wow. Likens God's righteousness to a high mountain. And there's all these references, 131 of them. Most of them are in poetical format, but God treads on the mountains. The clouds are the dust of his feet. Then have you even thought about Jesus in mountains? How many times does he go to the mountain to pray? Teaches from the mountain. Takes his disciples to the mountain. Goes to the mountain, makes one of the biggest declarations. Remember Pastor's sermon not too long ago? Where he talks about, and gave you a little picture. I should have given him a better, he should have, I have better, see the mountain in the background. Where he took you, and Peter said, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, and he's talking about a cavern there. But what rock? Look at rock theology throughout the Bible. The image is very strong. You understand, rock in the ancient world was a symbol of immortality. Why were the pyramids built out of stone? Look, all around the pyramids are all the workers' houses, but you don't see any of them because they weren't made out of stone. Made out of mud brick. Stone was, if you could afford it, of course, status symbol was definitely by your wealth, and therefore, the Pharaoh, of course, this is Cheops and his son Khufu, the largest pyramids in the world, 416 feet tall, but all made out of solid stone. What, 230-something million stones in these things? Enough to go here to the moon a couple times, something like that. But immortality. Everything's built out of stone in the ancient world. And in fact, you move down through, when you get in the Greek culture, the theater. All the theaters, ancient theaters, all cut out of the side of hills in the living rock. Dionysus, the god of wine and vegetation. It's fascinating. In fact, if you look, Zion displaces Mount Sinai as God's dwelling place on the earth. Isaiah prophesies this, and then if you go to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 14, they could not stand before my holy mountain. They were being consumed with fire, it says, coming down. Remember the passage in Hebrews? But Mount Zion, different place. Wow. Then all the way to the book of Revelation. So here it is. It says, for you are not come unto a mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire unto blackness and darkness and tempest. I move forward. And so fearful was the appearance, that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But you are coming unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable host of angels. Hebrews talks about that. Wow. Mountain theology. So it's very significant, I believe, obviously, how God presents his people and brings them into contact. Well, here are all the different locations for Mount Sinai, class. Good luck, Jebel Mount, as early as Edward Robertson, he was a preacher, and he traveled throughout Palestine and all the way down to Sinai and over into Jordan, documenting places. You can buy his 2-volume work on which we use today for geographical locations. He believed it was Mount Moses. Jebel is Arabic for mountain. Musa, obviously, is Moses. Same thing with another guy, Barrett, Samuel, Simmons, Mount Sinai. And then we have another guy named Palmer, in 1972, said Jebel Safra, part of Jebel Musa. Not Jebel Musa, but the other mountain next to it, which is a little higher in elevation. Anyway, Jebel Sirbal, as I was telling you about, showed you some of them. Kedan, Bishar, Har Kakom. Har is the Hebrew word for mountain, by the way. I'm going to teach you a little Hebrew. Har. And of course, you have that in the famous word, Armageddon, right? Har, that's the word right there. Michael's mountain of Megiddo. Again, interesting why they call it a mountain. Many of you have been to Megiddo, and it's not a very big mountain, but nonetheless. Anyway, another put it in the land of Midian, east, and all the way down through even the famous scholar from Harvard University, Frank Moore Cross, passed away several years ago, believed it was in the land of Midian, but didn't know exactly what mountain. That goes back to the fellow I was telling you about, Bob Cornuke, and Ron Wyatt used his ideas that the mountain they found is the actual mountain. But as you can see, he's one of a long list of people for the location of Mount Sinai. So mentioned 39 8 times in the Bible, Sinai 39. Well, this is the traditional spot, class. Whoa. It looks like the mountain, doesn't it? It's so grand. And I hope that during the millennium, we get a chance to go see more of these places. Again, I hope there's a videotape library in heaven, don't you? I want to see all these events. What was it like? I mean, we can talk to Moses. Got my little black book tonight, man, just in case, right here. See, I wasn't joking. All my questions, I usually keep it with me. In case the rapture happens, I better keep it right there. Questions I want to ask. I wanted to ask you about this. But I hope, like we said, we can all have our 3D glasses and we can just watch all this stuff. Wow, this is how it really happened. Anyway, some people will be in for some big surprises. Anyway, Mount Sinai. I don't think he's been there, but from what I understand. But anyway, you can climb it, all right? You can climb it. It takes you about an hour and a half, 2 hours to climb up. But this is Jebel Musa, one of 7 possible locations. This is an aerial top. Obviously, not mine. All right, close, but I tried to get a ladder to get up this high, but it just didn't work. Anyway, this is the other one I was telling you about, the possible location. It's a little higher peak, but as you can see, very difficult. But on the top of this, it's pretty flat. In fact, there's a chapel dedicated to Elijah, and it was 7,500 feet, not 8,500 feet, as I mentioned earlier, but there it is, the top of Mount Sinai. But again, you can see the valley behind it, all right, giving places for the people to camp out. Well, when I was there, my first trip was in 1978, and it was just loaded with pilgrims. We got up early in the morning. We stayed at the youth hostel there. Now there's, like I said, all kinds of hotels and so on. But there was pilgrims from all over the world. Ethiopia, I mean everywhere. These are these are Ethiopians climbing up the mountain to some type of religious experience on top. But it's certainly dramatic, no question about it. This is what you have to do. You climb up the steps, all right? And even the burros can make it. But I told you, I didn't take a picture of it. I don't know why. At the beginning of these steps, it says there's 900 or 800 something steps. And it says, if you have heart conditions or you're pregnant, like you do at Disney World, it is could be quite strenuous. And then in the long ways, there's pools of water. So what do you think the first thing you see when you get on top? After you pass this journey, again, other paths the way up. Another little chapel dedicated to Elijah there in the valley. So what do you think? Yeah. First thing you see, guy selling Coca-Cola. No joke. I bought a DVD off him. There's Snickers, Coca-Cola, anything you want there, even DVDs sitting there. And there's a restroom on top, believe it or not. But I thought that was quite comical. First thing you see, you come up, Coke. Anyway, there's a Mars bar and everything. Yeah, pretty nice. Anyway, this is what it looks like on top. There's the chapel I was showing you about. That was me back in 1978, looking out over the mountain tops. The chapel, you're not allowed to go inside, but a lot of pilgrims pray and sing, so on. But quite impressive. But there it is. View from the top, catching the sunrise. It's just like that. We sing Purple Mountain Majesties. It's just like that. Purple Mountain Majesties. You sit up here, I mean, you want to spend hours up there, Wow. It's spectacular, no question about it. And you can see, obviously, why this has been the site of choice, just because of the spectacularness of the site. None of them have this type of grandeur. It's just breathtaking when you get up there. It's worth the trip, no question about it. Worth the trip to go up on view on top. And of course you can catch the sunrise, not the sunset, but quite spectacular as you move up on top. Now this site became very significant because in the 5th century, this was built. The monastery of St. Catherine's, all right? So when you come down the mountainside, you actually mount your horses up. You go up one side and come down the other around the backside. And this is the first thing you see. This is the monastery of St. Catherine's. Its full name is the Sacred Monastery of the God, Trodden Mount Sinai. is the official name. Sacred Monastery of the God-trodden Mount Sinai. Anyway, monks have been living here since over 1,500 years. Everyone who has lived there is buried there. There's a room where they actually have a room full of skulls that you can look for yourself. Anyway, inside it, of course, there's some other significant things, like they call it the fire bush. It's all red, and they said this is what Moses saw in the wilderness. But anyway, you can see very carefully this is the monastery. Now it's open to the public, but like I said, this is all closed down. They employ about 600 people because they have all kinds of farms, vineyards, and other things. They and the Bedouin that are there protect the site, as you can imagine. It has been harassed through the years. So before they open it up to the public, this is the only way in, right there. A basket. They would let that down and then pull you up by the basket. Opening door.
That's scary.
Yeah.
What's the water?
Huh? Well, they have wells.
Wells?
Yeah, wells.
Nothing way now.
There's a closer look of it. This is, of course, where the oldest manuscript of the New Testament was found, which the NIV Bible is based on, the Sinaiticus manuscripts found in Sinai. A guy who just happened to be walking along, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, and he had a private tour of the site, and he noticed in the garbage can some manuscripts, and he says, what's this? He says, oh, we use this for fire, to keep warm. We're going, what? Pulled them out. They came to be some of the oldest manuscripts of the New Testament, dating to the 2nd century BC. So he said, But anyway, Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Monastery, pretty nice. As you can see, the walls are pretty thick, pretty massive. But they had one of their monks attacked, like I said, a couple months ago. So they closed down. That was in the news, and I don't know if it's open yet, but that was said it's been closed now for a couple months. Everybody had to sell their camels. You could take a camel ride up to Mount Sinai. But anyway, it's been there. So this is one of the ideas that Lynn, the tradition that this is the mountain where God commanded Moses to come up, because the monastery in the long tradition, no other site has this tradition. But again, they're a couple hundred years removed when they built the monastery. Anyway, so God took him to Mount Sinai, and we don't know. Like I said, I hope there's a videotape library of what exactly happened on that mountain. The rumblings, the clouds, Moses came down from one of his visits, remember, and he had to do what to his face? Put a veil on it, because he saw the backside of God's glory. A light as it is. Light as it is. Well, just another couple minutes and show you where we're going to go. I have to leave a couple minutes early, so I just wanted to introduce for you our next topic and whet your appetite. I want to take you to the Israel in the wilderness. All right, Israel in the wilderness. We can only assume what things look like as they camped out, but in the center, in the center was the tabernacle, which God commissioned them to build. And of course, all of these things have significant ramifications to look at. How did they make them? What are they making out of? What was it like? Is there anything that we can compare it to? And again, one of the fascinating studies by a fellow I was telling you about, Kenneth Kitchen, everything even the dimensions of the tabernacle and the tent meeting fits very well with Egyptian literature, because all of these people that came out of Egypt, they only knew Egyptian culture. So the things that they're going to design and build are going to be based upon what they know. God doesn't tell them to make something that is, this is not a crystal cathedral. It's not made out of glass. There was no glass. You can imagine they said, get sand, melt it, make these glass panels. They're going, what? What is this thing? You remember Schuler's Church out there in California? Now defunct, Crystal Cathedral, they call it. I think it's a bank now, but spectacular. But they wouldn't build anything like that. They wouldn't even, what is this? So again, the material, everything that is in the tabernacle matches up very well with what we know from Egyptian literature. And it dates again to the time period of the late second millennium, 12th, 13th century BC, not again into the 4th century, as many scholars would like to say. The Bible is nothing but myths and legends, finally written down during the Greek time period of the Intertestament period, which is rampant. It's a dominant theory today, you understand. I don't know if you hear much about it, but that's all the people I deal with. So anyway, in the middle of the camp, the tribes, of course, were set around. Probably looked something like this. I'm not sure if they all had nice tents like this. But nonetheless, a nice illustration. But we want to go to, and I'm going to talk about it more next week, the tabernacle. Look, mentioned 14 times in the Bible. I think it's more than that. I think I got it wrong. Anyway, I have to make a correction on it. Anyway, if you go down to the Negev, where we were this summer, my wife and I took it down there. This is Solomon's Quarries, it's called. But there, the Israelis have put up a nice replica of the tabernacle, and you can actually walk inside it. They'll give you a guided tour, tell you about all the different objects within it. But you get an eye feel for, the heat's hot. It was quite an experience, the tabernacle. It was not there when I was there in '78. It wasn't even there when I was there in. It was there. First time I saw it was this past summer. Other friends of mine have seen it, but anyway, the tabernacle. All right, tabernacle. Anyway, close-up shot, a little bit of what you experience when you go there. Remember, out front was the altar, horned altar, monstrous. And then, of course, the tabernacle inside, which, of course, was set off with different veils. Specific dimensions were given for it. What type of material was made for it. And here, of course, the divine presence of God would reside. Again, this is kind of reminiscent of a temple. And, of course, the temple in the ancient world was a place for the deity to rest. What is, of course, the major difference between the Israelis in the ancient Near Eastern world is that in their temples they had idols. They had figurines that they made, that they worshiped. They did all types of rituals to the idol. They clothed it, they fed it every day, morning, evening, and night. I mean, it was a continuous process to make sure that the deity maybe would come and inhabit the idol, find a place of rest. They would take care of it, and therefore, in kind, they would do the same thing for them. And of course, the major thing that's missing here in the Israelite temples, obviously, is no idol. But what was in the inner recess of this? They made a what? Ark of the Covenant. We're going to get to that next week. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of it, of what it was made like. I mean, they did a pretty good job, even made out of kail wood, which was very common in the desert. It's basically impervious to rotting. It's like pressure treated wood. So very, very nice. So curtains with the small other laboring out front, and as you can move inside the objects. So it looks something like this. The tent of the meeting, the brazen altar where they bring the animal sacrifice in. Again, now keep in mind as we start getting into these, look a little bit next week at the remainder of this, they all have symbolisms toward God. Everybody sacrificed in the ancient world, but the focus of the sacrifice is totally different compared to the ancient Near East. All right? Everybody sacrificed, everybody offered incense, everybody had sacred meeting places for the deity. But this is a nice diagram of it. Of course, the inner recesses was the Holy of Holies, number 1 up there. Then you had the Ark of the Covenant kept. And that's a special object in and of itself, is it not? Mounted by 2 cherubims. Very common, another common motif. And then the veil, so that you couldn't see it because that's where God dwells. Then inside was the altar of incense. You had the lampstand or the menorah, right? The holy place. All of this area was basically a main hall, if you will. Later on, when they built Solomon's temple, they have 3 parts. Again, I keep using the word temple. You understand, there is no word for temple in the ancient world. Everything was a house. It was called the house of God, the house of David. Bet is the word. Like, anybody got the word Beth in their name? Beth is the ancient word for house. Temple is Greek. Comes a little bit later on. So they are tripart buildings where at least Solomon's is, where they had an outer porch called the Ulam, and then they had the inner main hall called the Hekal, and then they had the Holy of Holies. It was called the Debir. Those 3 words are used in the Bible. Sometimes the translators or translations just use the word temple, but you have to understand that's not the word used at all. Sometimes they're referring to the outer porch, sometimes they refer to the main hall, sometimes they refer to the inner sanctum. Table of showbread was in there, and then the outer veil. Out there, the tabernacle was made out of coverings of badger skins. Interesting. Ram skins dyed red, curtain of goat's hair, and then curtain of fine linen. All right. So this was built in the wilderness. We believe, or I believe, I take an early date for the Exodus, around 1400 BC, when they were free. All right. So this was dedicated to God. They carried it with them, set it up every time they moved in the 40 years they were in the wilderness. All right, so next week we're going to go into more detail about this and the other objects. So that'll be our concluding lesson on the Exodus. So look forward to seeing you.